What if I told you that one of America's most famous historical stories is completely false? For over 150 years, we've blamed a cow for destroying an entire city. The truth is far more complex and fascinating than the legend. On the night of October 8, 1871, Chicago was a tinderbox waiting to explode. The city had endured one of the driest summers on record. Rain hadn't fallen in months, and the wooden sidewalks, buildings, and even the roads were parched beyond belief. Strong winds swept across the prairie, carrying the scent of danger that no one could yet smell. In a small barn on DeKoven Street, something sparked. Not a cow's hoof against a lantern, as the story goes, but something else entirely. We may never know exactly what ignited that first flame, but within minutes, it would become a monster that devoured everything in its path. The O'Leary family lived in a modest home with their barn out back. Patrick and Catherine O'Leary were Irish immigrants trying to make an honest living in a city that often looked down on people like them. Catherine sold milk from their cows to neighbors, supplementing Patrick's income as a laborer. They were hardworking people who became the scapegoats for a disaster they didn't cause. The infamous story of Mrs. O'Leary milking her cow when it kicked over a lantern was fabricated by Chicago Republican reporter Michael Ahern. Years later, he admitted he made up the entire tale to make his story more colorful. But by then, the lie had spread across the nation, and Catherine O'Leary became the woman who accidentally burned down Chicago. The real fire began sometime around 8:30 p.m. on Sunday evening. Neighbors noticed smoke coming from the O'Leary barn, and soon flames were visible. In 1871, Chicago's fire department was already exhausted from fighting a massive blaze the day before that had destroyed 4 blocks on the south side. When the call came in about the O'Leary barn, the firefighters were running on fumes. But here's where everything went wrong. The fire alarm system malfunctioned, sending firefighters to the wrong location initially. By the time they reached the actual fire, precious minutes had been lost. Those minutes would prove catastrophic. Chicago in 1871 was essentially a giant wooden city. After the Civil War, the city had grown explosively from 30,000 people in 1850 to over 300,000 by 1871. In their rush to build, developers used the cheapest materials available, wood. Not just the buildings, but the sidewalks, roads, and even some bridges were made of wood. The city had built itself into the perfect fuel for a massive fire. The flames jumped from the O'Leary barn to neighboring structures with terrifying speed. The drought had turned everything into kindling, and the strong southwestern winds acted like a giant bellows, pushing the fire northeast toward the heart of the city. What started as a small barn fire was now a wall of flames marching relentlessly forward. As the fire spread, panic began to set in. Residents grabbed whatever possessions they could carry and fled. Horses pulling wagons charged through streets filled with smoke and burning debris. The lucky ones had time to pack. Others ran with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The fire reached the south branch of the Chicago River, but the drought had lowered water levels significantly. Burning debris floated across, igniting buildings on the other side. The river, which should have been a natural firebreak, became a highway for destruction instead. By Monday morning, the fire had consumed the entire south side and was devouring downtown Chicago. The business district, with its supposedly fireproof buildings, proved no match for the intense heat. Iron beams twisted like taffy, and stone facades cracked and crumbled. The Palmer House, one of the city's grandest hotels, was reduced to rubble. Witnesses described scenes that seemed apocalyptic. The sky turned black with smoke during the day, while at night, the entire horizon glowed orange. Ash fell like snow, and the heat was so intense that people could feel it from blocks away. The roar of the flames was so loud, it could be heard over the screams and shouts of fleeing residents. The fire jumped the main branch of the Chicago River on Monday evening, attacking the north side with renewed fury. This area housed many of Chicago's wealthiest residents, but money couldn't stop the flames. Mansions that had taken years to build were consumed in minutes. Lincoln Park Zoo lost most of its animals, though some escaped and roamed the streets alongside fleeing humans. The Chicago Historical Society's building burned, destroying countless irreplaceable documents and artifacts, chronicling the city's brief but remarkable history. People sought refuge wherever they could find it. Thousands gathered on the shores of Lake Michigan, standing in the shallow water as burning debris fell around them. Others fled to Lincoln Park, creating a massive refugee camp of displaced families. The lucky ones found shelter in buildings that somehow survived. Most spent days in the open air. The fire finally began to weaken on Tuesday, October 10th. Rain started falling that evening, the first precipitation Chicago had seen in months. But by then, the damage was catastrophic. The fire had burned for nearly 3 days, consuming 3.3 square miles of the city. That's an area larger than the entire downtown core of most major cities today. The human cost was staggering. Approximately 300 people died, though the exact number remains unknown because many bodies were never found. Around 100,000 people, nearly one-third of Chicago's population, lost their homes. 17,000 buildings were destroyed, including the post office, the jail, the waterworks, and most of the business district. The economic impact was equally devastating. Property damage was estimated at $200 million, equivalent to about $4 billion today. Insurance companies went bankrupt trying to pay claims. Many businesses that had taken decades to establish vanished overnight. But Chicago's response to the disaster became legendary. Instead of abandoning the city, residents rolled up their sleeves and began rebuilding immediately. Donations poured in from across the United States and even from Europe. Cities competed to send aid, and relief efforts were organized with remarkable efficiency. The rebuilding of Chicago became an opportunity to create a better city. New fire codes required brick and stone construction in the downtown area. The fire department was reorganized and better equipped. Streets were widened and building codes were strengthened. Most importantly, the fire led to innovations in architecture and urban planning. Architects like Louis Sullivan and Daniel Burnham came to Chicago to help rebuild, eventually creating the world's first skyscrapers. The Chicago School of Architecture was born from the ashes of the Great Fire. Catherine O'Leary lived the rest of her life under the shadow of a lie. She rarely spoke publicly about the fire and became increasingly reclusive as the cow story spread. She died in 1895, never having received a public apology for the false accusation that made her infamous. Today, the Chicago Fire Academy stands near the site where the O'Leary barn once stood. A small memorial acknowledges both the tragedy and the myth, finally setting the record straight about what really happened that October night. The Great Chicago Fire remains one of the most destructive urban fires in American history, but it also represents something uniquely American: the ability to rebuild, innovate, and emerge stronger from catastrophe. The phoenix that rose from Chicago's ashes became one of the world's great cities, and that transformation began with a fire whose true cause we may never know.